Howdy, how everybody? I don't know why I'm in a howdy mood. That's weird. I would never say howdy. What the heck is that all about? Hi everybody, this is Brian Altunia, co-host of Just Your Dad, here with another episode of our Just Your Dad podcast with my partner, my colleague, my close friend, my family, Shawn Francis. How are you, Shawn?
I am grateful, blessed, and excited, especially because of our guest today. This is the first time we've had a return guest. Yes. And our guest today is esteemed attorney, Georgianna Junco-Kelman, a fellow special needs warrior. And we're excited to have her back because the last time she was on, we talked generally about education and special needs, and we talked about what was in its infancy at that point in time, the manners in which the pandemic have affected things. But now there's so much that has taken place between vaccinations and progress and things of that sort, and especially here in the Los Angeles area. Not sure exactly how things are affected in other parts of the country, but we're going to jump right into that today. So welcome, Georgianna. Welcome back, I should say.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's awesome. And, we've seen, you've been on local news. For those that don't know, obviously, you've been an advocate for a long time pre-pandemic, and you've been an advocate for special needs families when it comes to dealing with things like IEPs and again, giving parents access to information about what their rights are as it relates to, the systems that exist to serve. I use that word a little bit lightly, but to serve our special needs families. So and we've seen you a lot lately on the local news. And so the great thing about what we do, for those of us who are just
lots to say, lots to opinionate.
Not just local news. She's done battle on CNN too.
CNN, Fox News, bring it. Yeah,
it's actually true. That's actually true. And in Los Angeles, we're in this, we're in this hotbed of activity. There's a lot of stuff happening in California as it relates to the pandemic and the opening of the society and not. But I just want to say, for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, welcome. First of all, welcome. Please feel free to put stuff in the comments. Our friend Robert Moorhead is here as always. Great to see you, Robert. For those who are not catching us live, we're on YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio, Pandora, pretty much anywhere there's an outlet for podcasts, and on our own radio program down in U.S. Virgin Islands, WSTX-AM radio. Welcome to all of our listeners there. This is going to be amazing. You're going to have to put your seatbelts on, because not only does Georgianna have a lot to talk about, she talks very fast too. So it's going to be awesome. I'm hoping that, but by the way, what I started to mention was different than what you've had. We don't have an agenda like some of the broadcasters do on national news programs. This is a platform for you to share with our viewers and our listeners and your community and our collective community on the things that parents should be looking for, things that parents should be fighting for, and know what their rights are. So we're excited to be involved in this conversation with you today. So welcome back, welcome again to the show. And this is a little bit different than the last time that we were all together. I think we were just kicking our show off many months ago, and you were one of our early guests. So we're excited to the progress that we've all made. So, and glad to have you here. So first thing is, I don't know how you prioritize, how we're going to rank the things that we want to talk about. But I think the first question that most families are talking about, which is now evident, we've had our children at home for a year, doing homeschooling for a year. Parents have been working from home for a year. And now as things open up, what does this mean? And we know what it means for a lot of people, but what does this mean for our families with special needs children who have been homeschooling for a while? And what is the opening up of our school systems, if you will, or opening up of our society mean for parents with special needs children? Should we start there?
First of all, it means tremendous relief, right? Because children with disabilities learn differently, obviously. And in order for them to access their education in school, they have myriads of services throughout the entire day for different areas of needs, with the ultimate goal of accessing the curriculum. So you can imagine families at home for a year without any of this support, expected to ensure that their child can focus on a screen for 4 hours a day. It's been an impossibility. The majority of my clients have struggled to a degree that I cannot begin to put into words, and are still struggling. So we are also anxious to get back, but it's not that simple of an answer, because there's not some uniform rule that applies. Depending on the district that you're in, some districts have done a fantastic job and they've accommodated these students all along, and to the extent that they were able to, as permitted by the county and the state, they've had these kids in school on one-on-one instruction type scenarios to the extent they could. Unfortunately, other districts didn't. The LAUSD, as you know, which mostly impacts a lot of us, more, it kind of hits home because this is sort of the area that we all live in. And, majority of the kids I represent are in the LAUSD. I can tell you these families have been in dire straits. And so moving forward, sadly, I don't have great news to report in terms of what is the plan, because as of today, we don't have a plan. And I've been making phone calls. My assistant and I are trying to get to the bottom line. I can't tell you how many IEP meetings since last March, including that we're in the height of IEP season right now. So I'm doing 2 to 3 IEP meetings per day. And I asked the same question at all of these meetings, including yesterday. I was called aggressive because I dared ask the question, what does the special education planning look like? Because, special education is a spectrum. So you've got the special day classes, the mild, moderate, the moderate, severe, the SLD classes, specific learning disability. You've got the general education students in regular education accessing resource support, which is the pull out and push in support with a special ed teacher. So there's not just one brand of special education. There's all of these, these different facets of how services are delivered. And so when I ask the question, it's not just one answer to one question. There's many questions to answer. What about these students? What about these students? There's very different levels. I've not gotten one consistent answer other than we're waiting for a directive. Well, as of now, kids, I believe from K through 6 are returning. I want to say April 19. That changes as the wind blows on a daily basis. And then middle and high school, April 26. What I do know for sure is middle and high school, all students will be in a classroom for the first 30 minutes with an advisory teacher dealing with social, emotional transition issues coming back. And then 3 periods per day, including lunch, will be in a classroom on a computer on Zoom with noise canceling headphones on and a teacher in a different room. That's a whole other conversation that you all know how I feel about, which to me is enraging because all PPE has been applied. $435 million have been spent. Ventilations have been changed in every single school. Vaccinations, all teachers, most will be vaccinated by next week. There is zero excuse why teachers aren't in the classroom moving forward, which, by the way, in every other district, they are in the classroom teaching their students. Why the LAUSD refuses and the explanation for it, it's complicated and political and not a discussion we need to get into here today. The bottom line is our kids with disabilities still don't have a plan. So my question yesterday was, what about the general ed students that have resource support? They need that one-on-one instruction every day with their small group instruction or their special ed teacher. The answer is still, we don't know yet. So that's extremely frustrating for families. So while families are excited to get back to school, their kids need that one-to-one instruction and the social interaction. At least these kids are in the classroom. At the very least, I'd rather they be in the classroom on Zoom, which isn't ideal at all. But a lot of these kids also have one-to-one aids, right? They have special, speech and language support. They have occupational therapy, physical therapy, adaptive physical education, recreational therapy, psychological counseling. I've been asking the question, how are those services going to be delivered? And the answer I'm mostly getting is likely still on Zoom after school, which again is super frustrating because we've been doing that for a year. And I can tell you that delivery of service that way doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not going to work. And so while we're seeing obviously the trend toward going back, and ideally, I believe the governor said today or yesterday that there might be some sort of compulsory measures in place to make sure that there is physical instruction in the fall, mandatorily speaking. He didn't go as far as to say it's going to be a mandate, but it was sort of implied that enough is enough. At least come the fall, we can expect to be in the classroom full time, all day, every day. That science today, the county, the state, the Department of Education, everyone has said, as of today, as we sit here today, there is no reason why kids can be in the classroom all day, every day, receiving their services. But here we are still.
Wow.
And for those who don't know, the Los Angeles Unified School District is massive. It's been one of the biggest complaints about that school district.
Plus students, 80,000 plus IEP students. It's huge.
Wow. How many students total?
About 80,000. Well, total, I want to say 650,000. It used to be more, but there's been a bit of an exodus. So you've seen a lot of parents leave the district and go off to charter school for very obvious reasons. And I want to say, in terms of IEP students, I think we have approximately 80,000, if not more, special education students.
So
it's a huge challenge. It's behemoth. There's no question. It's extremely complex. But we've had a year, people. We've had a year. We should be ready to go.
Our kids are in a different district, and so I'm going to ask something that might seem redundant, and because this all came to my attention, I learned that from you. I think it was last week. So you mean to say that they literally roll out a plan, as most districts have, as to when and how kids go back to school, but Los Angeles Unified School District literally has no plan as to how special needs kids, that's 80,000 of the 650 estimated, fit into that equation?
Absolutely not. As of last week, admittedly, they had yet to start the collective bargaining, the UTLA and the LAUSD, to address special education. As of last week, they were intending to start soon.
So before they've even had any negotiation with the teachers union, they got plans to open the door.
They've not discussed special education students ever. When you go back and you see the interim agreement since last March to current date, go and try and find this paragraph about special education in their contract. Now, special education has been 100% marginalized, and the LAUSD has been given the green light to bring back, at the very least, special education children, moderate severe children, the most impacted, and children in lower income neighborhoods, the more vulnerable students, the English language learners. They've had permission to bring those students back since September, if not before that. Even when the surge was at its highest, they still had permission. The districts who had kids back at that time kept them. And with the implementation of the PPE and the safeguards in place, these kids continue to attend school physically. I know because they're my clients. The LAUSD has done absolutely nothing to go in any way an extra length for special education district.
Wow.
Special education students. I had a judge, I said this not that long ago, I think it was Fox News, a judge who I was having a conversation with in a mediation, because the way I'm handling these matters is case by case. The only way we can do this, and I can only help one kid at a time. That's what I do. And so I try really hard to get families to understand that there is help, just got to seek it. And this judge said to me, the LAUSD has not risen to this moment at all. And it's 100% true. 100% true.
Let me ask you this. Hold on. Just want to say on this subject, because I have a 13-year-old in middle school in the LAUSD. And, he's so my first question is, let's take a neurotypical child first. With 2 months left in the school year, and really for his middle school education, goes into high school next year. My first thought is like, what's the point? Right? I would much rather see our special needs children who need the one-on-one support, who need the face-to-face. I would much rather have seen them get a priority than even my own son, who's neurotypical, because his access to information and the support that he needs is much less than our special needs children. So to me, it doesn't even make any sense why we're sending our kids back with 2 months left in the school year.
And let me tell you, 2 months of in-person instruction for these kids, along with getting their related services, can make a significant difference in terms of trying to build them up and sort of recoup some of those that they've lost. And a lot of these kids have windows, as you know, with autism, there's a very critical window. And unless there is intensive intervention during that particular time that the brain is so malleable to learning and developing, that window closes. And so we never give up on our kids. We never keep teaching and supporting and offering what we can, but it is so critical to get in there at the correct time for their optimal development ultimately. And so many kids have lost out on that in the past year. And what's enraging to me is that it has been by choice, and it has been due to political motivations. It hasn't been placing our kids' interests first and foremost. That hasn't happened. So that is extremely frustrating, because these families aren't going to be able to regain that time. We'll push forward, and we can try and, we can go to due process and obtain a ton of compensatory education, which parents should do. They should maximize. But it's never going to bring back the time they've lost that was so critical. That's the enraging and tragic part of all of this, and that it's continuing. We're still seeing that at a time when we are on the orange level, about to open up completely in June, we still don't have our most vulnerable students, at the very least, back in school. That is reprehensible.
Let me ask you something. You mentioned several things, and I don't have a naturally litigious mindset, so I'm not, sue the person. But if you're talking about choice, and I mentioned you mentioned that they're choosing to do so because they must be informed to some extent about how malleable the brain is, how short that window is. Knowing those types of things, is there, and it might be an inflammatory question, but if you can't answer it, is there room for someone to take legal action against the district? And is that, or is that not discrimination then?
Absolutely, it's discrimination. Absolutely, it's discrimination. And there's been a number of lawsuits that have been filed. I've filed, I can't tell you how many due process complaints in the last year. And a lot of my clients are placed in private school because the district hasn't provided them with what they've required. And a lot of families are opting that route. On a larger sort of legal scale, you can file civil lawsuits, class action lawsuits. That's not what I do because I don't have the time. I am more in the trenches now. I go to the IEP meetings. I do my best to maximize what I can get for them at the IEP. And, I work very closely with the LAUSD. Well, we battle, we fight, we have a love-hate relationship going on. But I try really hard at these meetings to be reasonable, and I try to appeal to their sense of morality. There's a difference between the law and being moral with our actions, and those two sometimes don't intersect anywhere. And I try to appeal to them, to their sense of humanity and decency, and I ask them, place yourselves in the shoes of these families. Remove that administrator hat in this very, clinical way that they approach things. This is a child. This is a special education student who already is going to struggle, who is not on an equal playing field to begin with. It is your job to make that field as equal as possible. So let's go. Let's talk about how we can do that. And some IEP meetings are very successful, and some of them will kind of drop down their guard. Okay, how can we do this? And to their credit, a lot of them will say to me, we hear you. We want to do this. We can't. We have directives. We've got powers that be. We've got our hands tied. And so when we get to that point, that's when we have to move to the legal route and file a due process complaint, or file, a complaint with the Department of Education, or you file a lawsuit, whatever the issue may be. I try really hard to work on that level and get things to move the quickest. If that doesn't work, which a lot of the times we proceed to appeal, and we're very successful at appeal. I've been able to work out every single case I've done this year, but you need that support to know how to get there. And that is sadly what they respond to. And the reality is families are misinformed. Families are misled. Questions are answered in a sort of tenuous way where families are still confused and don't know what their rights are. And that's just, that's sort of been the system forever, right? It's just been compounded so much more now because the LAUSD specifically now, they're so behind on assessments, on IEP meetings. All of these things have federal guidelines and timelines. Right. They don't get to suspend, which they told a bunch of families in the beginning, even through the summer and beginning of this year, all timelines are suspended. Federal law doesn't apply. We don't have to apply the IEB. We're doing, the learning distance plan. That's what we're going by. Wrong. They're just making stuff up as they go along. IDEA has never been suspended. Federal law has never stopped being applicable. But families who are already so inundated on the day-to-day, they don't have time to go pursue, appeals and what have you. They're surviving. They're surviving. And so a lot of them just don't have the bandwidth to go research and find out, well, what can I do? Even though they know that the day-to-day is wrong and it feels inherently wrong. And they ask questions and they ask for things and they're told, no, no, no. And your gut tells you this isn't right. But a lot of the families they've lost that wind in their sails to fight, because they have to fight other things in their home with their kids every single day. They're surviving. And it's tragic and it's horrible. And again, the injustice in it to me is that we could have done more. We can do more, but we're choosing not to do more. And that to me is unconscionable.
It's as if there's so many priorities at play, right? There's the federal guidelines, the state guidelines, you've got the district, you've got administrators, you've got the teachers union, and then you've got the parent advocates, right? You've got on the political side, public school versus private charter conversation. There's so many agendas at play here that it's overwhelming, I'm sure. And this is a massive school district as well, one of the largest in the country.
Kids are lost in the midst of all of that. Where are our kids in the midst of all of that? They're the pawn, right? Our kids are the pawn in that battle.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
The benefits to the child are put way, way, way down on the list relative to all those other.
They purport to be speaking on behalf of these children. The evidence speaks for itself. They're not.
Agreed.
They're not.
The last time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm good.
The last time you were here, we talked about, I haven't heard it generally mentioned in a while. It hasn't come up. But, there's no one evil person that sits on school district and decides I'm going to make life difficult for these kids or whatever have you. So the natural consensus seems to be that one of the challenges is simply the mere size of the district. There's been conversation about breaking it up. We talked about that a little bit the last time you were here. What, if any, progress or suggestion has taken place with regard to that, and how difficult is that to even do?
That's you can completely dismiss that as an option. That's nowhere near on the radar of what we're talking about. And it is beneficial to keep it the way it is to many people. Mm-hmm. And that's the reality. That conversation isn't being had at all. It should be had because it is entirely too big. And we all know that. But that's near in the totem pole of conversations right now. But it is a huge district, granted. But again, we've had a year. And when you're seeing other districts, mind you, smaller than the LAUSD, but like New York is the largest district in the country. They're making it work. They've had their students back for months. They've got their special education students taken care of. They're larger than the LAUSD. And so when you see, because you're seeing the battle play out in real time between the UTLA and the LAUSD. And when you're seeing the so-called bargaining, I'm, looking for where's the students' interest here? Everything that's being bargained and negotiated, it's different objectives. It's not about the students. We've been able to safely open for quite some time. The money was spent. The implementation of all of these requirements have been done for months. It has been safe, but the rhetoric that saying it's safe doesn't fit the agenda of the rhetoric. And so that's the problem, is there are too many other things in play here. I'll give you a quick example. And I don't want to make this, badgering or attacking the UTLA, although it's kind of impossible not to make that part of the conversation, because it is inherently in the conversation.
Right.
There's been bargaining going on, ready to go back to school, presumably within a week or two. I think it was just yesterday, the day before, there's a new demand on the table. They want childcare, free childcare for all teachers. They want free childcare for and they want to the teachers that have young toddler children They want to stay home. They don't want to go back to the classroom. And part of the bargaining is they should not be allowed. They have the choice to stay at home and teach virtually. And those with young children want childcare paid for. So they want to stay home to teach at home. And they want childcare for their child because they need to stay at home to teach at home. Also, the teachers who are going back to school. So part of the bargaining became, for now, we are going to subsidize childcare for these teachers. That was passed, and Buettner said yes to that yesterday. Along with, the bigger picture is the UTLA is demanding free childcare for all teachers starting in the fall. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? That's something that they've been pursuing for years, and they've never gotten it. You know what they're doing? And again, I don't want to turn this into this bitching session, so to speak, but what I am seeing as a special education attorney, seeing my clients attempt to hang themselves from telephone poles and swallow batteries to kill themselves, which has happened to my clients this summer. They're now in residential treatment centers that the district is paying a mint for. So everyone loses here. But when I see that, and when I see this collective bargaining, which is a shameful attempt at capitalizing on things they've wanted for years by weaponizing a tragedy to get that which has nothing to do with the interest of children, especially those in special education, I cannot stay quiet. I cannot not call that out. And it is shameful that more people in authority in the LAUSD aren't saying enough is enough. The governor, the mayor, Superintendent Buettner, somebody has to stand up and say enough. And so we the lawyers, activists, you guys, we're out here saying enough. It's badgering, it's extortion. It rises to almost a level of blackmail. And I can speak to that because I personally have been on the front line seeing what is happening to special education students. I've had 5 of my clients attempt suicide, 5 of them. And I've got so many families that call me in desperation. They don't know what else to do. And talk about childcare. These families don't have childcare. They're low-income families who can't even go to work because they got to take care of their kids. What about them? Is anyone addressing them? So you can see the inherent unfairness and injustice in all of this, and why it's so frustrating for families, and why families in South LA, families in low-income neighborhoods are standing up and saying to the union, you don't speak for me. They're polarizing marginalized communities to obtain that which is absolutely irrelevant to the needs of those kids, because those kids are the most impacted. Those parents are the ones that want to get back to school more than anyone else. But they're creating a narrative where finally these families are saying, wait a minute. They're taken to the streets and saying, you don't speak for me. I want my kid back to school. And everything is in place this minute as we speak to have them back in the classroom all day, every day. They're just choosing for political interest not to do it. And that's the reality of the situation.
Let me ask you this. We talked a little bit about the New York district having some success in getting folks back to school. Are there other models of successful, when it comes to the special education community, are there other models around the country that are working where the special needs children are getting services?
Of course there are. But again, it goes back to the point is they're choosing not to do any of this.
I get it.
They've not prioritized a plan for these kids. They haven't even begun to, meaningfully address any of it. I mean, I tell you, I'm shocked when I'm at these IEP meetings, and I have them every day, and I ask the question every day, and the answer is, we don't know. We don't know. We are waiting for the directive. We don't know. And school starts in a week? And we still don't know how these kids are going to be, how all of these different needs and all of this different programming for special education, because it is a huge broad spectrum of services for, it's an individualized education program. It's called individualized for a reason. Not one IEP is like another. And so they're all tailored in different programmings from regular education all the way to residential treatment centers. There's a huge, spectrum of needs that are met in very many different ways. And so that hasn't been addressed. So when you're hearing a year later, on the heels of opening schools, that special education hasn't been remotely meaningfully addressed, again, unconscionable.
When they say they're waiting for the directive, That sounds like you're waiting for an answer from someone. Who are they expecting the directive to come from?
You're waiting for the UTLA and the LAUSD to get it together and figure out a plan and come to an agreement as to what it means. That's what you're waiting for. And there's still a lot of, there's a lot of fluidity still in terms of the leverage that teachers have and the flexibility that they're being given, because they're not saying you have to come back to school. They're still giving certain teachers the option not to come back to school. Specifically, teachers with younger children can stay home now and get their childcare paid for. So there's still, and there's a shortage also, of teachers now. And you also have, a big problem is assessments, for special education children, not only, children that should be assessed now who do have IEPs, but have additional needs that must be assessed to determine additional services, especially now. Or specifically the children who have yet to be identified with an IEP who must be assessed. Right now, I've got about 7 to 8 clients on sort of holding pattern to be assessed for their IEPs because the district has refused to assess. And again, that has been all by choice in violation of the law, which has said all along, the timelines for assessments do not stop. And so they just recently, like in this week, have started assessing, but there's still a huge shortage. Why? Because that's also not mandatory. It is on a voluntary basis. The speech and language pathologist, the psychologist, the special ed teacher, it has to be voluntary that they will come assess. So there's a shortage of assessors because a lot of people are saying we're not ready to go back and assess in person. So there's this huge waiting, this line. There's a very long line waiting for to be assessed. And what I'm advising my clients is, special education, special needs, disabilities don't wait. These kids need the support now. You don't get to press, there's a pause button. And, when you guys decide to assess again, we'll reconvene. No, it doesn't happen that way. And so families have rights, and they have rights to take their own action and give notice to the district. You failed to assess my child. It compelled me to put my child in private school. I'm going to come back later once you do assess and find eligibility, and I'm going to go ahead and sue you to reimburse me for the money I spent because you failed to meet my child's needs. But parents don't know that. You know what I mean? So I'm doing that now left and right because it isn't right. These families have to be compensated one way or another. And they understand that.
You gave an estimation, of next week, I think, when they think that teachers will be vaccinated. This might seem like a loaded question, again, based on what they've done, or more importantly, have not done. What's that?
I'm used to loaded questions. It's
okay. But what are the chances you think that will impact anything as far as pushing the needle along? Yeah, I was afraid of that.
This has been part of the bargaining. The initial thing was until, first it was, we need ventilation, we need, the proper PPE, we need to implement all the proper social distancing measures, right? The LAUSD spent I want to say $435 million on all of these things, right? So check, got that part done. Nope, not good enough. Now we need to have, for a minute, it was kids have to be vaccinated before we go back to school. But guess what? The vaccine isn't for kids. Next, they walked that back. And then they said, well, now teachers can't go back to school. It's still not safe, even though the CDC, the Department of Education, the state, the governor, Garcetti, everyone has said we are now at a tier where it's been for some time now. We are able to go back in small cohorts at the very least for special education. At the very least. No, they didn't do it. And now it went to until teachers are all vaccinated, we're not going back into the classroom. Great. Programming was rushed. Vaccines were given to teachers, all vaccinated. Why, pray tell, now that all of this has been met, we are in the orange tier, they're still not going to be in middle and high school classrooms come April 26th. Somebody please tell me why. And then you hear the UTLA rhetoric, which is basically more polarizing and more division and saying, low-income families are still at high rates. You are not the CDC. You are not the science. Follow the science. You've said from day one, follow the science. The science is telling you it is okay for all of these kids to go back to school. So who are you to trump that? And it's shocking to me that there is not one authority out there, real authority saying enough. Not a one.
And I was just going to say that, we had a question, Robert asked a question about, well, can't the state step in? But it's really, it's not really it's not a federal government.
Step in when the governor gets thousands upon thousands of dollars in contribution from the UTLA.
That's the problem, right? He says it's a local, right? Even we had a guest on here who's running for LA City Council, and even the LA City Council is like, it's a district versus UTLA conversation. It's not like local government can't step in. I still think that the state, because the state pays the district, right? They pay per child in class, which I think is really the impetus behind rushing these kids back to class now to get more money from the state. But
because now it's like, we can be back in school. So now they need the body in school in order to get paid, right? So now there's this rush. And there was a survey that was done that said that only I don't know what it was, a really small percentage of mind you, not the people that were polled, the parents that were polled was a very small fraction of the full, number of families in the LAUSD. So we've got to count that in. However, within the people that did respond to the survey, a very small percentage said we're going back. And the UTLA, of course, used that to say, underprivileged communities are scared to come back. No, that's not the case at all. They're looking at this from, is it worth it? Families want to go back to school. But if they're going to take the risk still, these higher infection rates communities, it better be worth the risk. Why would I bring my kid back to school to sit in a computer, look at a screen with no teacher, when my kid could be doing the same thing at home completely safe? What kind of sense does that make? But that's fun to a whole other argument. And that is where we land. Again, back to nothing to do with the actual issue at hand in returning to the classroom safely. The conversation has nothing to do with that. And again, it's enraging to me that no leaders are effectively standing up for these kids despite politics. And again, it's politics, so it's inherent. These people aren't going to speak up because they've got their own personal interests. And they've got, their donations and their ties. And that's what it comes down to. You need somebody with no dog in the fight to say enough. And sadly, there isn't that one person in politics.
How difficult is it, and maybe this is just out of the realm, for a federal intervention? If I were Joe Biden, I'm sitting down, whoever, and I hear that this is taking place out there, and I'm like, you know what, we need to do something about that. What does that mean? That a president only has the option of, executive order and intervening or something like that, or none at all?
President Biden has the biggest bully pulpit in the country, and he could stand up and say, all of the science indicates that our kids need to be back in school. Mm-hmm. What they actually said was, when he promised that within 100 days, kids would be back in school, when they reached the 100-day mark, it was, what we really meant was at least one day a week is considered back. What? No. Like, somebody stick to your promise. Somebody follow through. And yes, the president, although he can't force the states to do anything in this realm, the president could encourage and push and say, get these kids back to school. The mayor of Chicago did it. She stood up and said, enough is enough. And she took on the union and said, get back to school now or you will be fired. No one in LA has the backbone to do that. And they're letting this union run amok and control the show. And they've controlled it from day one. And the LAUSD has submitted and succumbed to every single demand they have made, right down to yesterday, Buettner saying teachers will get an additional subsidy of $500 a month for childcare. Who pays for my childcare? For your childcare? For the first responder? For the nurse? For the grocery worker? Who pays for their childcare? They're at work. They've been at work from day one.
Right.
But yeah, what is this? Wow. They talk about privilege. You are literally the poster child of privilege right now. You all are. Because everyone else is busting their butt to do what they can. They want hero pay. I'm sorry. You all need to look up the definition of a hero who sacrifices for others. Right. And I get hate emails. I get all kinds of stuff because I'm speaking up. And at the end of the day, when I get criticized and I'm called a bully and I'm called a teacher bully and I couldn't care less, my response is always, I represent special needs children. Period. End of story. That is my only interest, my only dog in this fight is to get these kids what they need. What is yours? Can you say the same thing? No. End of story. And so I don't care about the critique anymore. Somebody has to speak up and somebody has to say enough is enough. Our kids are falling apart. We are losing a generation. And nobody has the guts to stand up and say, nobody with authority and power has the guts to say enough, not a one.
Well, the challenge too is that between UCLA, the union, and CalPERS, the pension, fund, are two massive contributors to political campaigns. And in the state of California and the city of Los Angeles, unions have a very big say and very big pull in politics, and no politician wants to go up against this union, which is causing, again, this is a major issue.
So it's left to parent groups. You know, there's quite a number of parent groups that have organized and are coming together and have hired law firms and are trying to pursue injunctions. But you know, as you know, the wheels of justice turn super slow. And so anytime we want to see any immediate response, it's not going to happen, which is why I tell families, here's the quickest road. You know, I do the quickest thing I can do, client at a time. I've had, you know, people come to me, let's file a class action. I'm like, a class action is not going to resolve a thing overnight. We need to take immediate action. And I do that by getting what my client needs through the appellate process, you know, the due process. Right now, the quickest way to get to where you need to be and get what your child needs is through a due process complaint. That's the quickest way to get anywhere. Everything else takes years, appeals, all of that. And even in due process, you know, your hope is that you can mediate and get to a place where you all can agree on what's necessary. And I've been able to do that, and many lawyers are able to do that. But sometimes you come to a heads and you don't, and then you've got to go to a hearing and fight for it. But the good news is 98 to 99% of these cases will get resolved at mediation. So parents should pursue that route to see the quickest results and getting what they need faster, because I can promise you that what the LAUSD and other districts have done over the past year is 100% illegal. And if you put it in front of a judge, you're going to get a lot of positive results, because the law is the law, and you can make up whatever as you go along. You know, blaming the pandemic for everything under the sun, that's not legally feasible. But you've got to take those actions.
Yeah.
You know, something I want to talk about really quickly, because families, we talked about this earlier, that families don't know this. And I'm getting a lot of phone calls from families that are telling me, even my own clients, families that are telling me that they're being told that their child can't go back to school because they are not tolerant of the mask. And that, I'm here to tell you, is 100% discrimination. It is very clear that mandates have been issued, and it's not just mandates, it's the law. But the Department of Education has clearly issued guidelines reminding, just very recently, they actually used the language, we are reminding districts that they cannot reject a child from school who has autism, who has sensory-related challenges, who cannot tolerate the mask due to those sensory-related challenges. And so parents just need to go to their doctors, get a note from their doctor that says, due to X, Y, and Z reasons, due to this disability, student cannot tolerate a mask, cannot be forced to wear a mask. And they cannot tell you no. And I can't tell you how many families are keeping their kids at home and they should be at school, because they're being told by administrators, unless your kid can keep a mask on, you can't come to school. That is 100% discrimination. That is a civil rights violation. So families need to know to push back on that. I've had IEP meetings convened just to discuss this issue, where they want to call it an accommodation. It's not an accommodation. This is the law, period. End of story. Like,
how long has that been in place?
Always. There's never been a time when students with disabilities in the classroom were forced to put, you know, in the time of the pandemic, it's never applied where they couldn't be in school without a mask on. And it should be in the IEP, you know, just to make things clear and to have no question, put it down as an accommodation. Student cannot be forced to wear a mask due to disability. And if they tell you no, that is 100% a civil rights violation. And it's an Office for Civil Rights complaint at the very least that should be filed. So families just need to know, and, you know, oftentimes the threat is enough. Just be equipped and be knowledgeable and know the law and know your rights, and tell them, here's what my understanding is. Find it, you know, if you just Google, in fact, I did it earlier, special education, CDE guidelines on masks for kids with disabilities. If you Google that, it will go straight to the CDC, it will go to the CDE, and it will tell you exactly what the guideline is, and it will cite exactly the statute, and it very clearly lets you know that districts can't do that. So you can print that out, take it to your IEP meeting and say, this is illegal, you can't do this to my child, and your child has absolutely the right to go to school. And never mind the fact that, you know, children, again, science, let's follow the science. Children are not vectors of this virus. Children have a very small infection rate and spreading rate, and it's been shown a gazillion times. And so kids do not pose that risk, which is another reason why it's enraging that teachers aren't going back into the classroom at the very least. Because again, you know, when the kids are older, middle school, high school, I guess that's the reasoning for not being in the classroom. But again, it's against what the science is telling you that you can do with middle and high schoolers, where everyone is saying, even with middle and high schoolers, you should be back in the classroom, because even middle schoolers, these are, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, don't spread this virus. And so teachers should be in the classroom with these kids. And now you're going to have the vaccine for 16-year-olds and older. Although that's, we'll see what happens with that. But
one more time, city guidelines for what?
It'll be the CDE, California Department of Education guidelines for masks, requirement of masks for children with disabilities. And in fact, if you go to, give me 1 second.
We'll put it up on the screen.
I can send you the link and you can put it up on the screen. But if families just Google CDE guidelines on masks for kids with for students with disabilities, the very first link that pops up is the exact language guideline from the CDE, which says COVID-19 students with disabilities and face coverings. And it goes on to tell you, I can read it to you. The purpose of this notice is to remind local educational agencies, LEAs, of state and federal guidance requiring face coverings, including allowable exemptions, in order to avoid implementing policies that may result in a denial of a free and appropriate public education. And it goes on January 14, 2021, the California Department of Public Health published COVID-19 and Reopening in-Person Instruction Framework. And that tells you all of the guidelines about children with face coverings, and not just children, but any public entity that cannot force adults with disabilities to wear a mask who can't tolerate. It's not just children. This applies to adults as well in the public sector. The public, any company, government agency, whatever that is publicly related, it's a government related agency. They cannot force their employees to wear face masks when they have a disability. It applies not just to students with disabilities, but to individuals, adults with disabilities.
Interesting.
Wow.
So that's that whole no mask conversation that we've been embroiled in for the last year. But as it relates to,
there's so much confusion because we're being told now, if you're vaccinated, you can, interact with also vaccinated people without a mask on. And so, but then we're told, no, you need to have a mask on at all times. So it's super confusing. But what we have to focus on is on students themselves, the risk that they pose, which is extremely limited, and the guidelines that we've been provided in order to get them back to school safely along with teachers. And if we follow that path, there is no reason for kids not to be in school all day, every day, as we speak.
Georgianna, your work as a warrior for special needs families and children is not limited to the classroom and giving black eyes and bloody noses to school districts. So tell us, if you will, about some of the nonprofit what's that?
So that's one way to put it.
Tell us about some of the nonprofit organizations that you work with and or have started. I'm familiar with your work with Autism Speaks as a result of mine as well. That's how we met. But tell us about some of the other nonprofit organizations that you work with and or have created also. Yeah,
I'm actually in the back of my mind, I have a bit of a plan to create my own nonprofit. The plan that I have is I see a lot of students that, for example, with dyslexia, who there is not a single district that has appropriate programming for kids with dyslexia, because it is a very particular science research-based programming that has to be applied throughout the entire school day. And so the most you'll see is kids get pulled out of the classroom for 30 minutes based in dyslexia programming, but the science indicates that it has to be intensive throughout the day, and the student has to be taught that way all the time. Anyhow, long story short, a lot of families who have the means place their children in places like Westmark, for example, or Park Century. And these are schools that are very expensive. And they're research, evidence-based schools that provide programming all day in very small structured settings, appropriate programming for kids with, for example, dyslexia. But obviously not everyone can afford these schools. And, we fight the districts to get them funded, but it's a reimbursement model because these are not certified non-public schools. So districts aren't contracted with them. And so parents have to fund upfront, and then we can pursue funding from the district and reimbursement if we can show that the district offer wasn't appropriate, and therefore parents had to go to the private specialized school. And so a lot of families don't have the funding for this. So my sort of pie in the sky dream is to create a nonprofit to raise monies in order to provide scholarships for these schools for families whose kids need this specific type of programming. So that's sort of that's being mulled over. That's sort of a little bit in the works. We'll see what happens there. But I've been on the board of directors for Inclusion Matters by Shane's Inspiration now for about, I want to say 7 years. And it's a phenomenal nonprofit, which is like my whole heart, I always say, because it's where I started my journey. Literally, when my son was, 1, 2, 3 years old, he wasn't walking. We were told he'd likely never walk. And Shane's Inspiration, which is what it was called at the time, we've evolved and we rebranded, and it's now Inclusion Matters by Shane's Inspiration. And it's parks that are built accessibly for all children to play together. And that's always so important for me to emphasize, because oftentimes families think, oh, these are parks for kids with disabilities. Well, no, you're missing the point. Inclusion. These are parks for all kids. It's parks so like they're built in a way where the kids with disabilities can join the regular kids, and they come to a place where everyone can play together in sort of an equal literal playing field. And so we build these beautiful state-of-the-art parks all over the world where they're wheelchair accessible. We've got enlarged swings, sensory based. We've got little nooks for kids on the spectrum to hide in if they need to get away from the craziness and the madness. So there are these beautiful parks. We've got, I always forget the figure because we're growing all the time, 70 something all over the world.
Wow.
And then like 70 something in development. And it's not just the parks. We also have an inclusion education program. And we partner with many schools, including in many districts, including the LAUSD, where we will partner the special education children with the regular kids. And they come together in the classroom. We put them in a bus together. We go to the park for several hours. And the education that these kids get about social inclusion is invaluable. The only way that you can truly teach this is by bringing these kids together, and you see these responses from the typical kids in the classroom afterwards, because there's a discussion afterwards. What did you learn? What did you learn about your special needs buddies? And it is so heartwarming when you hear these kids say, they're just like me. They want to play just like me. They need friends and they need buddies. And so that's sort of that's where we start. It's in the playground. This is where we first form those crucial friendships. And so the earlier that parents can bring their typical kids and special needs kids together to sort of learn those lessons that, different isn't less. And it's okay to have a friend who's different. That's been, what has driven me from day one to the work that I do has been that, my own son, which, as a quick sidebar, the last 24 hours have been super emotional for me because I made a big decision. My oldest with special needs, Brandon, who's 18, he's a senior in high school, and he's really struggled with the pandemic, as many kids like him, because his social opportunities, those interactions, most meaningful moments are in school. He was part of the basketball team, and, he had his friends. And so all that was ripped from these kids. This is all that they had. And now they're at home with mom and dad and their siblings, and that's it. And there's, my other sons have outside activities and social activities and sports and friends. My oldest doesn't. So it's very difficult for him, and he feels very isolated. Anyhow, long story short, we decided that he was going to stay another year in school. And we decided that his IEP team was very gracious. And they're like, you know what, let's do that. He's on a modified curriculum. So we can, as kids with disabilities can take until 22 to graduate, to either a certificate of completion or to get their credits if they're not able to finish on time. So we were going to give him a whole extra year to kind of get those opportunities and experiences that you get your senior year that he didn't get to experience. But he's at a juncture where he's 18. He's conserved, but we give him, obviously, he still has the right to express his mind and his wishes, and we have to honor what he tells us he wants to do. And he just has, in the last several months, actually, he's been expressing, I'm done. I'm ready to go to the real world. I'm ready to find a job. I don't want to go back to high school. And so as a parent, I wasn't ready for that. I had processed, okay, 1 more year, I've got time, because now we've got to figure out, as parents of kids with special needs, what happens after they graduate, especially those of us with kids who are limited in their abilities. So what happens after school? Because at least in school, they're in this cocoon, right? And they're protected and they've got their services. And now it's the real world. And so we've made that choice. And going back to inclusion, I want to urge families, because I see it in my own kid, how much he craves hanging out with typical kids and, special needs typical kids. He just wants to have friends. He just wants to belong to a regular world. He just wants to be a part of the same activities that all kids do. And it's hard for him because he's quieter. He can't really initiate the same. So he's kind of waiting for kids to come to him. that we've worked so hard on these skills for years, which we've maximized, and it's incredible to me to see this success in of what he's accomplished. But it all goes back to that inclusion from the very beginning, is making sure that our kids are seen and not marginalized and out of the shadows, and being brought out into the real world and included in that world, and making sure that they've got all kinds of friends all the time, because that's the most difficult part for our children is that lack of interaction and their inability to kind of really initiate that. And so we need that community support to make sure people come together knowing how important that mission is.
Right. Now, what age did you do conservatorship?
We just finished it.
You just finished it. Wow.
He just turned 18 last August, and it's once they turn 18, and we just had our hearing, which is it's a very emotional process, because you're hearing a judge say to your child, let me back up. So we start as early as possible. The second our child is identified with a disability, and it's different for every family. Some kids are significantly impaired. Some kids won't need a conservatorship, obviously. I've always known that my kid was going to need a conservatorship. But all of these years, we maximize services and support. And, I've included him in regular education with a 1-to-1 aid, with modified curriculum. He's never been in a special ed class because I always knew that the environment for him, and it's not for every kid, I knew that he needed to be in a fully inclusive environment. And I knew that the academics weren't ever going to be maximized because he has a severe processing disorder. So I knew that in terms of algebra or chemistry, he wasn't going to be able to do those things. So what mattered to us was developing those social independent skills to be as independent as he could be in the world one day. And so that was what was most important to us. And we believe, when we see the progress from where he was, a kid that wouldn't talk to anybody and was just like, in his little world bubble cocoon, and who he is now and what he expresses now, what he wants to do and how independent he's become, I believe that is as a result of that inclusion and exposing him to realities and to the real world and to typical, situations. And we've always treated him very equal to his brothers, and he's been as accountable when he gets in trouble. And we've never used the disability as an excuse. But you hope, through all of these years and all of that work, that hopefully he'll get a high school diploma on, regular education type, core curriculum basis. And he won't, and that's okay. He'll get a certificate of completion. Or that, he won't need the conservatorship, or he won't need that, not a life coach, a job coach, which he's about to get, to help him with his first job, which is great. There's partnerships with corporations that do that, and they partner with the Department of Rehab and the regional center. So it's amazing that we do have these services. I'm so grateful for that. But, you always hope that won't be needed. You do all of this. And it's okay, because we're here and we've done all that we looking back, we know that we did all that we could do. Although as parents, at times we have that moment of, did I?
Always. Yeah.
In the regular education curriculum, maybe a year longer, but you have to go. And at the end of the day, we don't have those answers. Like we don't know. We can only go with what we know and what's in front of us. And so we always make choices based on what we knew then. And so I think we've done all we can. And we had his conservatorship meeting, and it was so much more emotional than I thought. I just kind of fell apart when you're hearing a judge saying, here are the 7 things that he's giving up. You completely control, like the right to get married, all of his finances, all of that, which he absolutely needs, obviously our support with, but a very emotional moment as a parent to know that, okay, we're here, but it's okay. We will continue to maximize his abilities, and hopefully, he loves music and writing and mixing in studios and what have you. So now I'm going to go hit the ground running to try and find some soul someplace who will be open to guiding my son and holding his.
We have an answer for that. We have an answer for that. We'll connect you off air. We have an answer for that.
Oh yeah. That's my 24/7 preoccupation is what comes next.
Yes. We are coming right up on the clock. And just, so we need to.
Yeah, just keep talking.
Well, it always goes by fast, and it's one of the great pleasures about what we do.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to say, Georgianna, it's always a pleasure. As I told everybody at the very beginning, top of the hour, to put your seatbelts on. I knew that it was a lot. And by the way,
I'm working on a book if I can never get around to it, because I just feel like I'm bursting with so much information. I just got to put it on paper, and hopefully that can help more people.
Well, the nice thing is that for those families that are struggling and dealing with those issues, they to know that there's an advocate like you out there that's full of energy and spit and vinegar, as they would say, and fighting and fighting and fighting for doing the thing that's right for our children. It's encouraging and so amazing to have somebody in support of those things that are so important to us as parents. So, I'm speaking for others. I would say so. Thank you so much for doing the work that you do. And
my pleasure. Again, we're called to do. We're called from our own personal experiences. It's why you guys are here. We're here. We're here in public service. We're here returning what we can because we know what it's like to walk these shoes. And my personal experience just catapulted me. I didn't have an option. I knew this is what I have to do. And, yesterday my son again said to me, and I don't want to get emotional, do I have meaning and purpose? And we have these conversations because he also feels like I'm not really getting a diploma. I'm getting a certificate and I'm not really going to college. So I'm different. And my brothers are going to college, so we have those conversations of, what if, right? Like he's asked me the question, what if I didn't have a disability? And that's gut wrenching. I'm like, well, let me tell you what if you didn't have a disability. Let me tell you about the impact you've had on my life, where everything I've done for the past 18 years is a direct result of you. All of the kids I help, the nonprofits, all the work I do is as a result of your inspiration. So look how much you matter. And then you kind of swell up with like, oh, okay. But that is short-lived, and then we go back to what's next. What do I do next? Are you going to get me a job? Where am I going to go? Do I work at a studio? And so then it's those questions where you stay up at night going, okay, let's go. There's always a phase. Like there's always a next phase. You go through the IEPs all your life, and you get and you secure your services, and you think, okay, we're good. Well, for now, there's always the next phase. And as parents of kids and ultimately adults with significant needs, that's going to be the mission of our entire life. We don't get a break. And then the biggest worry is what happens when I'm gone. So then we worry about that and making sure that plan is in place because it's very scary as you know.
And that's the work that Shawn and I do professionally as well. We have all of that piece of it. So yes, we're in that very, very much in that conversation.
Exactly.
As we wrap, and we've got a little long, but as we wrap up, first of all, so again, I want to say thank you for the work that you do and what you've talked about and what you've been talking about, I think it's the basis of what we try to express and share every week, which is now more than ever, the concept of empathy and love means so much more to be empathetic about the challenges that others are facing. And I'm sure that you've just opened the eyes for a lot of folks who may have neurotypical children, have no idea what special needs families are going through when it comes to educating their children. So thank you.
And our message, such a large part of my message is for neurotypical families. Quick sidebar. I had a friend recently say to me, I'm lucky I never needed to know about those parks. Like, you're missing the point.
Right.
Know about those parks.
You should know about those parks, and you should tell people about those parks.
Tell the world about those parks. Bring your children and their friends to those parks. The park isn't for kids with disabilities. It's for kids of all abilities. That's the point of inclusion, is all playing together. And so that's the message to neurotypical family. Don't just go to the regular park. Go to the Inclusion Matters by Shawn Parks.
With that said,
valuable gift you can give your child.
Mm-hmm. With that said, inclusion really is everything. Like Brian said, it's about empathy. So I want to thank those that are going to be tuning in on various platforms, those that are tuning in on WSDX in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I, as always, want to thank the women in my life because I couldn't begin to be who I am or hope to be without them. And that includes my mom, Jan, and my wife, Laura. And just remember that somebody someplace needs to know that you matter. Somebody someplace needs to know that you care. They need to be seen. They need to be heard. Remember, we talk about special needs, but there really aren't any special needs. Everybody needs those things. Some of us just need more of them than others. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Georgianna. And for those of you watching, we love you.
Yeah, thank you again.
Talk to you soon. Bye.